In the stillness of an eternal void, Sophie White's soul lingered, a flicker of light amidst the shadows of her unjust end. Her life, once filled with unwavering devotion, had been snuffed out by betrayal and violence. As her essence hovered, a divine spirit, radiant and ancient, appeared before her. Like a gentle breeze, its voice carried the weight of cosmic justice. Your suffering has moved the heavens, Sophie White. Your heart, pure yet broken, deserves redemption. I grant you a second chance to rewrite your fate, to rise above the treachery that stole your breath. Return and let your truth shine. With a surge of warmth, Sophie's soul was pulled back, her eyes snapping open in a familiar, threadbare room, the scent of damp wood and toil filling her lungs. She was alive again, reborn in the body of her younger self, years before her tragic demise, with memories of her past life burning vividly in her mind. In that former life, Sophie had been the dutiful wife of Liam Xander, a soldier whose recent promotion had granted him the privilege of bringing family to live on a military base. Her heart had swelled with hope, dreaming of a shared future in a place of honor and stability. But Liam's choice shattered her. With guilt etched across his face, he had clasped her calloused hands and said, "Sophie, I promised my brother I'd care for his widow, Rachel Shen. She's delicate, frail, not like you. You're strong, capable of enduring the countryside for 3 years. I swear I'll come back for you." His words, laced with false earnestness, had convinced the naive Sophie. She waited year after year in the rural Xander household, tending fields and serving Liam's ailing mother, Diane, while Rachel basked in the comforts of the base. 3 years became 6, and Sophie's hope withered. Broke and desperate, she journeyed to the base, only to uncover a gut-wrenching truth. Liam and Rachel lived openly as a loving couple, embraced by the military community as husband and wife. The revelation crushed her. When she confronted them, demanding answers, their faces twisted with panic. Liam's pleas turned to restraint, and Rachel's eyes gleamed with malice. In a flash of violence, Rachel shoved Sophie, her head striking a cabinet's sharp edge. As blood streamed down her face, Rachel raised a dumbbell and ended Sophie's life with a sickening blow. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all seared into Sophie's soul as she died, helpless and enraged. Now, reborn, Sophie sat on the edge of her worn cot, her heart pounding with divine purpose. The Holy Spirit's gift was not merely life, but clarity. She saw Liam's manipulation, Rachel's deceit, and Diane's complicity with piercing truth. Her past self had been a fool, brainwashed by notions of duty, believing her sacrifices honored a military wife's role. But there was no honor in an unregistered marriage, a sham built on lies. Liam had never legally wed her, using her as a placeholder while funneling resources to Rachel. Sophie's hands clenched, nails biting into her palms. She would not be their servant, mule, or victim this time. The morning sun filtered through cracked shutters, casting frail light on the room's sparse belongings. Ragged clothes, a chipped bowl, remnants of a life spent serving others. Outside, she heard Diane's sharp voice barking orders, a sound that once spurred her to work, but now fueled her resolve. Sophie rose, her reflection in a tarnished mirror, showing a face hardened by memory, yet untouched by time. The divine spirit's words echoed, "Let your truth shine." She would not merely survive, she would dismantle the lies that bound her, exposing Liam, Rachel, and Diane for the vipers they were. Her first test came swiftly. Liam, home on leave, stood in the courtyard, his uniform crisp, his eyes carrying the same false sincerity she remembered. He approached, taking her hand, and began, "Sophie, my promotion means we can live on base, but I've made a promise to my brother." The words, identical to her past life, ignited a fire in her chest. She yanked her hand free, her gaze cold. "No, Liam, I won't wait, I'm done." His face faltered, shock replacing his rehearsed guilt. The Sophie he knew, obedient, enduring, had vanished, replaced by a woman armed with divine mercy and unbreakable will. This was her second chance, and she would seize it, step by unrelenting step, to forge a path of justice and redemption. The morning air hung heavy with the scent of dew and freshly turned earth, but Sophie White felt only the weight of Liam Xander's gaze. He stood in the courtyard of the Xander household, his soldier's uniform pressed and gleaming, a stark contrast to the patched dress clinging to Sophie's frame. His hand, still warm from grasping her moments ago, hovered in the air, stunned by her abrupt withdrawal. "No, Liam, I won't wait." "I'm done," she had said, her voice cutting through his rehearsed plea like a blade. The words echoed in her mind, fueled by the divine clarity granted in her rebirth. She had crumbled under his promises in her past life, but now, armed with the truth of his betrayal, she stood unyielding. Liam's brow furrowed, his eyes flickering with confusion and a trace of wounded pride. "Sophie, what's gotten into you?" he asked, stepping closer, his tone softening as if coaxing a skittish animal. "You know how much my brother's death meant to me. Rachel's his widow. She's lost everything. She can't survive out here like you can. You're strong, Sophie, the backbone of this family. I'm only asking for 3 years until I can settle things on the base. Then I'll bring you, I swear." His words mirror her past life, each syllable dripping with the same false sincerity that had once chained her to a life of toil and heartbreak. But this time, Sophie saw through the mask. The way his eyes darted, the slight clench of his jaw, betraying his expectation of her compliance. Her lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. 3 years? She repeated, her voice steady but laced with ice. "And then what, Liam? Another 3? Or 6, like before, until I'm worn to nothing, slaving for your mother and brother's widow while you and Rachel play house on the base?" Liam's face paled, his mouth opening to protest. But Sophie pressed on, her words sharp and unrelenting. "I know the truth now. Our marriage was never registered. I'm not your wife, legally or in any way that matters. You used me, Liam, as a servant to keep this household running while you funneled everything to Rachel. I'm done being your fool." The courtyard fell silent, save for the distant cluck of chickens and the rustle of leaves. Liam's shock was palpable, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He hadn't expected this. Sophie, the obedient, enduring woman he'd molded, now staring him down with a fire he didn't recognize. "That's not fair," he said, his voice tightening. "I've always cared for you, Sophie. The marriage thing, it was just paperwork, a formality. We've lived as husband and wife, sharing a home and life. Everyone knows that. And Rachel, she's family, my responsibility. I owe my brother—" "You owe him nothing," Sophie snapped, cutting him off. "Your brother's death wasn't your fault, and Rachel's no delicate flower. She's manipulated you, played the grieving widow to keep you tethered. But me? I owe neither of you a damn thing. I've worked my hands raw, cared for your mother, and kept this house standing, and for what? To be cast aside while you parade Rachel as your wife?" Her voice rose, each word a release of the rage she'd buried in her past life. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her eyes locked on his. "I want a clean break, Liam. No more promises or lies." "Let me go." Liam's face darkened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. He wasn't used to defiance, least of all from Sophie. She had bowed to his every word in her past life, proud to support a soldier's career, blind to his deceit. Now, her refusal threatened the careful balance he'd maintained. Sophie in the countryside, Rachel by his side. "You can't just walk away," he said, his voice low, edged with a warning. "We're a military family, Sophie. You know what that means. Even without a certificate, our bond is recognized. If you try to leave, I'll report you for abandoning a military marriage. The consequences are severe, fines, maybe even jail. You don't want that, do you?" The threat hung between them, heavy and cold. Sophie's heart pounded, not from fear but from the audacity of his manipulation. Such words would have cowed her in her past life, but the divine spirit's gift had sharpened her resolve. She saw Liam for what he was, a man clinging to control, desperate to keep her as the invisible pillar of his household while he chased a life with Rachel. "Do what you must," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "Report me, drag me through the mud. But I won't stay here, slaving for you and your family. I'd rather face a cell than another day of your lies." Liam took a step back as if struck. For a moment, vulnerability flashed across his face. Perhaps fear that Sophie's rebellion could unravel his carefully crafted world. But he quickly masked it with a soldier's composure. "You're upset," he said, forcing a smile. "I get it. Let's talk later when you've cooled off. You'll see reason, Sophie. You always do. He turned, striding toward the house, confident she'd bend as always. But Sophie stood rooted, her gaze burning into his back. He underestimated her, blind to the divine fire now driving her. Diane's voice called for Liam, sharp and demanding inside the house, pulling him into her orbit. Sophie remained in the courtyard, the weight of her decision settling over her. Leaving wouldn't be easy. Liam's threats were real, and the village's eyes would judge her. But the divine spirit's words echoed in her mind. Let your truth shine. This was her first stand, the spark of a rebellion that would dismantle the chains of duty binding her. She would not wait, not serve, not sacrifice. With every step Liam took away, Sophie's resolve grew. The battle had begun, and she would fight, not just for freedom, but to expose the rot at the heart of the Xander family. The Xander household buzzed with tension, the air thick with unspoken accusations, as Sophie White moved silently through its cramped corridors. Her confrontation with Liam had left a crack in the family's facade, and she felt the weight of their scrutiny. Diane's sharp glances, Rachel's nervous fidgeting, Liam's forced calm. But Sophie's heart burned with the divine fire of her rebirth, her resolve unshaken by Liam's threats. She knew brute defiance alone wouldn't free her. She needed cunning, a way to unravel their lies from within. The opportunity came unexpectedly, hidden in the folds of Rachel Shen's crossbody purse, left carelessly on a wicker chair in the main room. Sophie's fingers brushed the purse's worn leather as she passed, her instincts prickling. Ever the schemer, Rachel had been clutching it tightly since Liam's return, her eyes darting protectively whenever Sophie drew near. Curiosity, sharpened by her past life's betrayals, urged Sophie to act. With Diane napping and Liam out tending the fields, Sophie slipped the purse open. Inside, among trinkets and a crumpled handkerchief, she found a small glass bottle labeled Miracle Oil, its amber liquid glinting faintly. The label promised vitality and allure, but Sophie's reborn clarity saw it for what it was, a tool for Rachel to seduce Liam, to cement her place by his side on the military base. The thought twisted Sophie's gut, memories of Rachel's smug triumph in her past life flooding back. A plan formed, swift and ruthless. Sophie darted to the shed, where she kept a jar of thick, sticky glue for mending tools. Back in the house, she emptied the Miracle Oil into a clay pot, its cloying scent making her grimace, and refilled the bottle with the glue, carefully preserving the label's pristine appearance. She returned the bottle to Rachel's purse, her hands steady despite the pulse racing in her throat. This was no mere prank. It was a strike against the woman who had stolen her life and crushed her skull in another timeline. As Sophie stepped back, the purse undisturbed, a cold smile touched her lips. Let Rachel try her seduction now. That night, the household retired early, the silence broken only by the creak of floorboards and the distant howl of a dog. Sophie lay awake, her senses alert, waiting for the inevitable. At 3:00 a.m., a piercing scream shattered the stillness, followed by Liam's frantic shouts. Sophie bolted upright, her heart pounding with grim satisfaction. She slipped from her room, peering into the dimly lit hallway where Diane, roused from sleep, stumbled toward Rachel's room, her face a mask of panic. Sophie followed at a distance, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor as the screams grew louder, raw with pain and humiliation. In Rachel's room, chaos reigned. Liam and Rachel writhed on the bed, their bodies tangled in a grotesque parody of intimacy, the glue binding them in an agonizing embrace. The bottle of Miracle Oil lay spilled on the floor, its sticky contents betraying Rachel's failed scheme. Liam's face was contorted in agony, his curses muffled by shame, while Rachel sobbed, her delicate facade crumbling. Diane hovered, wringing her hands, torn between horror and the urge to shield her precious Rachel. "What did you do?" Diane hissed at Rachel, her voice trembling. Rachel, gasping, could only whimper. "It was supposed to work. It was for us." Sophie lingered in the doorway, unseen, her expression unreadable. The divine spirit's words echoed in her mind. "Let your truth shine." This was the first glimmer, a crack in Rachel's carefully crafted image, a hint of the scandal that would soon engulf her and Liam. Neighbors, woken by the commotion, began to gather outside, their murmurs filtering through the open window. "What's happening in the Xander house? one whispered. Sounds like trouble, another replied, their voices tinged with curiosity and judgment. Desperate to contain the disaster, Diane shouted for Liam to cover himself as she shoved Rachel's trembling form under a blanket. But it was too late. The glue's grip was unrelenting, and their attempts to separate only drew more screams, each a beacon to the village's prying ears. Liam, his soldier's pride shattered, roared for help, and Diane, with no choice, sent a neighbor's boy running for the village doctor. As the boy dashed off, Sophie slipped back to her room, her heart racing with triumph and caution. She had struck a blow, but the war was far from won. By dawn, Liam and Rachel were rushed to the hospital, wrapped in sheets to hide their shame, the glue still binding them. The village buzzed with gossip, whispers of scandal and disgrace spreading like wildfire. Sophie stayed behind, her face a mask of concern as neighbors lingered, eager for details. Poor Sophie, one woman muttered, working herself to death while those two continued. Another spat. Rachel's no widow, just a schemer. And Liam, a soldier? Ha! The words were a balm to Sophie's wounds, proof her sabotage had planted seeds of doubt. In the hospital, doctors worked frantically, baffled by the glue's tenacity, while Liam and Rachel endured the humiliation of their exposure. Sophie knew they'd blame her, suspect her hand in this debacle, but she'd left no trace. The bottle was Rachel's, the plan hers. Sophie had merely turned their deceit against them. As she swept the courtyard, her hands steady on the broom, she felt the divine spirit's presence, a silent nod to her cunning. This was just the beginning. The Xander family's lies were fraying, and Sophie would pull each thread until their world unraveled, exposing the rot beneath their pious facade. The rain fell in relentless sheets, soaking Sophie White to the bone as she trudged back to the Xander household from the hospital, where Liam and Rachel had been rushed after her glue sabotage. Her patched dress clung to her skin, her shoes squelching with every step, but the chill in her body was nothing compared to the fire in her heart. The divine spirit's gift, her rebirth, had sharpened her senses, and the village's whispers of scandal fueled her resolve. She had struck a blow against Rachel's scheming, but the war for her freedom was far from over. As she pushed open the creaking gate, laughter from inside the house sliced through the storm's roar, stopping her cold. Through the rain-streaked window, Sophie saw Diane, her mother-in-law, holding a vibrant pink shirt, its fabric gleaming in the lamplight. Diane said this is perfect for Rachel, her voice dripping with delight. Pink suits her delicate charm. And these leather shoes? Give them to her, too. Oh. Rachel, seated in the main room, beamed, her arms already laden with new clothes and trinkets, gifts Liam had brought from the city. Sophie's breath caught, a memory from her past life flashing. Every gift Liam brought home had gone to Rachel or Diane, leaving Sophie with nothing but rags. Now, standing drenched in the doorway, she felt the sting of their dismissal anew. Rachel's eyes flicked to Sophie, a smug smile curling her lips before she looked away, feigning sweetness. Mom, don't give me everything. Maybe Sophie should have something too. Her voice was honeyed, but the mockery was unmistakable. Diane scoffed, shoving the pile into Rachel's arms. For what? Sophie works in the fields all day. She'll ruin nice things like these. Rachel, Liam's leave is short. Start packing for the base. Rachel's smile widened as she clutched her spoils, glancing at Sophie with a triumphant glint. Mom, wasn't that relocation spot meant for Sophie? Will she agree if I go instead? Diane's reply was cold as stone. She has no choice. Liam's decided. Besides, if Sophie leaves, who'll care for me? You're too frail for this work, Rachel. You belong on the base. Sophie's hands clenched, the rain dripping from her fingers, mixing with the fury boiling inside. For years, she had toiled, plowing fields, cooking, nursing Diane's endless ailments, without a word of thanks. Diane treated her devotion as a sin, her strength as a shackle, while Rachel, who faked illness and lazed about, was exalted. The hypocrisy was suffocating. Forcing a stiff smile, Sophie crossed the muddy courtyard and climbed the porch steps, her soaked dress leaving a trail. At that moment, Rachel emerged, arms full of bags, her eyes meeting Sophie's at the top of the stairs. A dark flicker passed through Rachel's gaze, and she lunged forward, aiming to shove Sophie down the steep, rain-slick steps. In her past life, Sophie would have stepped aside, yielding as always. But the divine spirit's clarity steadied her. She planted her feet, her body braced, and when Rachel's hands met her shoulders, Sophie pushed back with all her strength. A sharp scream tore from Rachel's throat as she stumbled, bags flying, and tumbled down the steps into the rain-soaked yard. Clothes, shoes, and gifts were scattered in the mud, and Rachel lay groaning, her ankle twisted, her face contorted in genuine pain. This was no act. She had fallen hard, her smugness drowned in the downpour. The scream drew Diane and Liam from the house, their faces paling at the sight of Rachel sprawled in the mud. They rushed to her, Diane's hands trembling as she cradled Rachel, Liam lifting her gently in his arms. Neither spared a glance for Sophie, standing drenched under the eaves, her breath steady despite the storm. Rachel cradled against Liam and whimpered. It hurt. Sophie, why did you push me? Her voice was weak but calculated, her finger pointing accusingly. Only then did Liam turn, his eyes narrowing as he noticed Sophie soaked and silent. Sophie, what the hell? You know Rachel's not well. Those steps are steep and it's pouring. What if she'd been seriously hurt? Can you answer that? Diane joined in, her voice shrill. Sophie White, you're out of line. If anything happens to Rachel, you'll regret it. Their words were a chorus of blame, ignoring Rachel's attempt to push Sophie first. Rachel's eyes glinted with satisfaction, clinging to Liam's neck as she murmured, Don't be too hard on Sophie. She's probably upset about the gifts. I'll share them with her, Diane snapped. Share? You're too kind, Rachel. Sophie's petty, cruel. How did we end up with such a daughter-in-law? Their accusations painted Sophie as the villain, erasing her years of sacrifice, and her drenched state was a mere footnote to Rachel's drama. Sophie stood unmoved, the rain masking the fire in her eyes. The divine spirit's words, "Let your truth shine," echoed, urging her to hold her ground. She said I didn't push her, and her voice was calm but firm. Rachel tried to make me, I just stood my ground. Liam's frown deepened, disbelief etched on his face, while Diane's shouts grew louder, demanding Sophie confess. But Sophie's gaze never wavered, her silence defiance louder than their accusations. The neighbors, drawn by the commotion, peered from their homes, their whispers adding to the growing scandal. Trouble at the Xanders again, one muttered. Sophie's had enough, hasn't she? As Liam carried Rachel inside, Diane trailing with the muddied gifts, Sophie remained under the eaves, the rain washing away the last traces of her old self. This moment, Rachel's fall, the family's blind favoritism, had unmasked their hypocrisy for all to see. The village's eyes were watching, and Sophie knew each whisper was a thread in the tapestry of justice she was weaving. She had drawn first blood with the glue, and now with Rachel's failed attack, she had exposed their true colors. The divine spirit's gift pulsed within her, a promise that her next move would cut even deeper, bringing her closer to freedom from the Xander family's lies. The rain had stopped, leaving the Xander household cloaked in a damp, oppressive silence, broken only by the faint groans of Rachel Shen from her room, where Liam tended to her twisted ankle. Sophie White stood under the porch eaves, her soaked dress clinging to her frame, the cold seeping into her bones. But within her burned the divine fire of her rebirth, stoked by the hypocrisy she'd just witnessed. Diane and Liam's blind devotion to Rachel, their dismissal of Sophie's years of toil. The village's whispers, sparked by Rachel's fall and the glue scandal, hummed in the background, a chorus to Sophie's growing defiance. She was no longer the servant they expected, and tonight, she would shatter the yoke they'd placed on her. Inside Diane's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Sophie White, get in here and make ginger tea for Rachel. She's hurt because of you. Don't dawdle. The order was familiar, a reflex from years of Sophie's obedience, but it grated against her reborn resolve. In her past life, she'd have rushed to comply, brewing tea, washing clothes, swallowing her pain. Now, she walked to the kitchen, her steps deliberate, leaving wet footprints on the wooden floor. She lit the stove, but not for Rachel. Instead, she cracked 4 eggs into a pot, added a generous chunk of brown sugar, and stirred, the sweet aroma filling the air. This meal was, for her, a small act of reclaiming what she'd been denied. As the brown sugar egg soup steamed, Sophie sat at the scarred kitchen table, savoring each warm spoonful, her body slowly thawing. The act felt revolutionary, eating freely without saving the best for Diane or Rachel. The door slammed open and Diane stormed in, her face twisted with fury. "Sophie White, where's that ginger tea? Rachel's waiting, and you're sitting here stuffing your face?" Her eyes widened at the empty pot, the audacity of Sophie's self-care enraging her. "You lazy, selfish girl! After what you did to Rachel, you dare eat like some pampered wife?" Sophie set down her bowl, her gaze meeting Diane's with a cold, deliberate calm. "Why should I?" she asked, each word slow and pointed. "Rachel's hurt because she tried to push me. I owe her nothing. Not tea, service, or a single breath of my effort." Diane froze, stunned by the defiance. For 15 years, Sophie had been her silent workhorse, never questioning, never resisting. This rebellion was unthinkable. "What did you say?" Diane sputtered, her voice rising. "You're married into this family, my daughter-in-law. When I tell you to do something, you do it. Now make that tea and wash Rachel's wet clothes." Sophie rose, wiping her mouth, her expression unyielding. "No," she said, the word a blade cutting through Diane's authority. "I've served you for years, cleaned your house, worked your fields, nursed your illnesses, while you gave everything to Rachel. I'm not your servant anymore." Diane's face flushed crimson, her hand swinging to strike Sophie. But Sophie's reborn instincts were sharp. She sidestepped and unbalanced. Diane lurched forward, crashing to the floor with a thud. Her chin struck the table's edge, blood welling from a split lip as she wailed in pain. Sophie stood over her, unmoved, the divine spirit's words, "Let your truth shine," echoing in her mind. Diane's screams drew Liam from Rachel's room, his eyes widening at the scene. "Mom, what happened?" he demanded, kneeling beside Diane, who clutched her bleeding mouth. "She hit me," Diane lied, her voice shrill. "I told her to make tea and wash Rachel's clothes, and she refused. When I scolded her, she attacked me." Liam's gaze snapped to Sophie, rage flaring. "Sophie, why would you hit my mother? Have you lost your mind?" "I didn't touch her," Sophie said, her voice steady as steel. "She tried to hit me, slipped, and fell." "That's the truth," Diane shrieked. "Liar! Liam, teach this wretch a lesson." Her words were a desperate bid to reclaim control, but Sophie saw the flicker of doubt in Liam's eyes. He knew Diane's temper, her penchant for exaggeration. Still, his loyalty to his mother and Rachel blinded him. He stepped toward Sophie, his fists clenched, his soldier's frame towering over her. "You're out of control, Sophie. Apologize now." Sophie's heart raced, but fear had no hold on her. She backed to the corner, her fingers closing around a wooden pole leaning against the wall, a tool she'd kept for mending fences, now her defense. She gripped it tightly, raising it just enough to signal her readiness. "I won't apologize," she said, her eyes locked on Liam's. "Not to Diane, Rachel, and you. I'm done being your mule." Liam's pupils widened, his advance halting. He hadn't expected resistance, least of all a weapon. Diane, still on the floor, gasped. She was mad. "Liam, do something." But Liam didn't move. The pole, Sophie's unflinching stare, and the weight of her words held him back. For the first time, he saw her not as the pliant wife he'd shaped, but as a force he couldn't bend. "This isn't over," he muttered, helping Diane to her feet, casting Sophie a complex look. Anger, confusion, perhaps a trace of fear. He led Diane out, her wails fading down the hall. Sophie lowered the pole, her breath steadying. Once in her prison, the kitchen felt different, reclaimed by her refusal. Outside, the village stirred, neighbors whispering about the Xanders' latest drama. Rachel's fall, now Diane's injury. Sophie knew each rumor tightened the noose around the family's facade. Her defiance had cracked their control, exposing their reliance on her labor. The divine spirit's presence pulsed within her, silently affirming her path. She had broken the servant's yoke, and though Liam's threats loomed, Sophie was ready. Each act of resistance was a step toward dismantling their lies, and she would not stop until their hypocrisy lay bare for all to see. The Xander household simmered with unease, the echoes of Diane's wails and Liam's threats lingering like smoke after Sophie's defiance in the kitchen. Sophie White stood in her small, sparse room, the wooden pole still leaning against the wall, a silent testament to her resolve. Her drenched dress had dried stiffly on her frame, but the divine fire of her rebirth burned brighter than ever. She had broken the servant's yoke, refusing to bow to Diane's orders or Liam's intimidation. But Liam's parting words, "This isn't over," rang in her ears. His threat to report her for abandoning a military marriage loomed, a chain she couldn't yet break. Leaving now would risk his wrath and the village's judgment, but surrender was not an option. Sophie's reborn clarity, gifted by the divine spirit, whispered a new strategy. Stay, but on her terms. She began packing, her hands folding patched clothes into a small bundle, each item a reminder of her years of deprivation. The act was deliberate, a signal to Liam that her heart was set on leaving, even if her body remained. As she tied the bundle, the door creaked open, and Liam stepped in, his soldier's posture softened by a calculated warmth. He said, "Sophie, let's talk." His voice low, almost pleading. "Are you mad about the gifts? I bought that pink shirt and those leather shoes for you, I swear. Mom got to them first and gave them to Rachel. She's had a hard life, you know that. I'll get you something better next time." His words, laced with false sincerity, mirrored the empty promises of her past life, when he'd let Diane and Rachel claim every scrap while Sophie toiled. Sophie's gaze met his, cold and unyielding. "It's not about gifts, Liam," she said, her voice steady. "It's about lies. Our marriage was never registered. You admitted it. I'm not your wife, just a placeholder you used to keep this house running while you pampered Rachel. I've slaved for your family for 5 years, worn rags, eaten scraps, and I'm done. I want out." Liam's face tightened, a flicker of guilt crossing his eyes before he masked it with indignation. "You're being petty," he said, stepping closer. "Rachel's frail, Sophie. You pushed her and hurt her foot. You owe her an apology. And Mom, she's bleeding because of you. Be reasonable like you used to be." The mention of her old self, obedient, enduring, stoked Sophie's anger. But the divine spirit's words, "Let your truth shine," steadied her. "I didn't push Rachel. She attacked me," she said firmly. "And I didn't touch Diane. She fell trying to hit me. I won't apologize, not to them, not to you. Do you want a loyal shadow to support your career? Find someone else." "I'm leaving." Liam's eyes widened, shock giving way to desperation. "You can't," he said, gripping her arm. "You love me, Sophie. We're a military family, everyone knows that. If you walk out, I'll report you for violating military marriage laws. You'll lose everything." Repeating his earlier warning, the threat hung heavy, but Sophie's reborn strength held firm. She yanked her arm free, her voice icy. "Please do it, report me. But I won't live like this anymore. Sacrificing everything for your family while you parade Rachel as your wife." Liam froze, his confidence faltering. He hadn't expected this Sophie, a woman who saw through his control. "You're not thinking straight," he muttered, retreating. "We'll talk tomorrow." As he left, Sophie's lips curled into a faint smile. His threats were real, but they'd bought her time to outmaneuver him from within. Sophie unpacked her bundle, a calculated retreat. Leaving now would play into Liam's hands, giving him legal leverage. Instead, she'd stay, but not as their servant. She'd mirror Rachel's laziness, refusing chores, eating freely, forcing the Xanders to confront their dependence on her labor. The next morning, she slept past dawn, a luxury she'd never allowed herself. When she emerged, the kitchen was chaotic. Diane and Rachel, unaccustomed to work, fumbled with breakfast. Their faces sour. Diane slammed a ladle down. "Sophie White, where's the food? Do you think you're some lady in the house now?" Sophie sat at the table, piling her plate with eggs and meat, foods once reserved for Diane and Rachel. "I'm sore," she said casually, taking a hearty bite. No energy for cooking. Rachel's eyes narrowed, her bitterness palpable, but she said nothing, waiting for Diane to act. Diane's chopsticks hit the table. "You ungrateful wretch! After eating our food, you won't work. Get to the fields." Sophie shrugged, stacking more meat on her plate. "I'm resting. Liam can handle it." Diane's face reddened, but Liam, hovering nearby, said nothing, his expression conflicted. He sensed a shift in Sophie, one he couldn't control. The village buzzed with fresh gossip. Sophie's refusal to serve, Diane's fall, Rachel's injury. Neighbors whispered that Sophie was done being their mule, and the Xanders were falling apart. Each rumor was a spark, fanning the scandal Sophie had ignited with the glue. Liam, desperate to maintain order, took to the fields, his soldiers' hands unaccustomed to the labor Sophie had shouldered for years. Diane and Rachel, too proud to work, bickered over tasks, and their entitlement was exposed. Sophie watched from the porch, her heart steady with the divine spirit's guidance. Her retreat was no surrender. It was a siege, starving the Xanders of her labor, forcing their true colors into the open. The battle for her freedom escalated, and Sophie was ready to pull the following thread in their unraveling lies. The Xander household groaned under the strain of Sophie White's rebellion, its once orderly rhythm shattered by her refusal to serve. The kitchen, now a battleground of half-cooked meals and dirty pots, bore witness to Diane and Rachel's incompetence. Their entitlement laid bare as Liam toiled in the fields Sophie had once tended. Sophie, her patched dress starkly contrasting with the new clothes Diane hoarded for Rachel, moved through the house with quiet purpose, her reborn resolve burning bright. The divine spirit's mandate, "Let your truth shine," guided her, each act of defiance tightening the noose around the family's lies. The village's gossip, fueled by the glue scandal and Sophie's stand, buzzed like a swarm. But Sophie knew the war was far from won. Rachel Shen, her delicate facade fraying, seethed with jealousy. Liam's attempts to appease Sophie, 200 yuan in cash and a new dress, bought in town, had ignited Rachel's fear of losing her place. That evening, as Liam worked late in the fields, Rachel cornered Sophie in the courtyard, her eyes glinting with venom. "Well, Sophie White, aren't you clever?" she sneered, clutching her purse that once held the sabotaged miracle oil. "Playing hard to get, squeezing money and clothes out of Liam. But let's be clear, he's given me his entire salary for 5 years, thousands, not your measly 200 yuan. That's just a beggar's tip. And I'm the one going to the base, not you." Sophie's lips curled into a calm, cutting smile, her reborn clarity seeing through Rachel's bravado. "Under what name, Rachel?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. "Only a legal family can join a soldier on base. What are you to Liam? His brother's widow? His mistress?" Rachel's face flushed, her smugness faltering. "Doesn't matter," she snapped. "I'm going, and you can't stop me." Sophie stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "Oh, I'll wait and see. But if Liam tries to pass you off as his spouse, I'll report it to the military office. Let them decide what a scheming widow deserves." Rachel stomped off, her anger masking panic, but Sophie knew she'd struck a nerve. That night, dinner was a tense affair. Sophie piled her plate high with meat and vegetables, ignoring Diane's glares and Rachel's bitter silence. Exhausted from the fields, Liam cleared his throat, his eyes darting between the three women. He said, "I've made a decision," his voice firm but strained. "Tomorrow, Sophie and I will officially register our marriage. It's time to make things right." The announcement hit like a thunderclap. Diane choked on her tea, Rachel's chopsticks clattered to the table, and Sophie paused her fork midair. For once, their voices united in protest. "No!" Diane barked. "You've been married 5 years. What's the point now?" Rachel echoed. "Everyone knows you're husband and wife. A certificate's meaningless." Sophie set down her fork, her gaze locking on Liam. "I'm not registering with you," she said coldly. "You can't chain me to this life with paperwork. I want my freedom, not your leash." Liam's face darkened his plan to placate her crumbling. "Sophie, be reasonable," he urged. But she stood, wiping her mouth, and walked out, leaving the family to stew in their discord. Diane's curses followed her, Rachel's soft sobs rising. But Sophie's heart was steady. Liam's move was a desperate bid to control her, but it had only exposed their fractures further. Later, unable to sleep, Sophie slipped into the hallway, drawn by hushed voices from Diane's room. She pressed herself against the wall, her reborn instincts sharp, and listened. Rachel's voice, nervous but determined, drifted out. "Mom, will this incense and oil work? What if Liam rejects me again?" Diane's reply was confident, laced with malice. "They'll work. I paid good money for them. The incense makes men lose control, and the oil enhances everything. Liam's stubborn, but he's always cared for you. Tonight, you'll seal your place. Sophie can't get pregnant. If she does, she'll have his child, and you'll lose him forever. Rachel's voice trembled. Is he taking her to the base, leaving me behind? Diane scoffed. It's a stalling tactic. Sophie's useful, she does all the work. Liam thinks he can sweet-talk her back in line, sleep with her, and get her pregnant. But we won't let that happen. Tonight, I'll distract Sophie. You light the incense and use the oil. It's your last chance. Sophie's blood ran cold, her fingers digging into the wall. The plot missile. Rachel attempts to seduce Liam, and Diane ensures that Sophie continues. In her past life, she'd been blind to such schemes, but now, the divine spirit's clarity revealed every thread of their deceit. She slipped back to her room, her mind racing. The incense and oil were in Diane's room, but Sophie knew better than to act rashly. Rachel's desperation was her weapon, and Sophie would let it backfire. She'd seen the bottle of miracle oil in Rachel's purse before, and her glue sabotage had worked once. Another chance would come, and she'd strike with precision. As she lay in bed, the house quiet but for the creak of floorboards, Sophie felt the divine spirit's presence, a steady pulse urging her forward. Rachel's gambit was desperate, but Sophie was no longer the prey. The village's whispers grew louder, Rachel's fall, Diane's injury, and Liam's marriage plan, each fueling the scandal. Sophie's calculated retreat had shaken the Xanders, and this plot was their counterattack. But Sophie was ready, her next move already forming. She'd let Rachel's desperation unravel her, exposing the family's rot to the world, one cunning step at a time. The Xander household pulsed with a deceptive calm, the tension of Rachel's desperate plot simmering beneath the surface. Sophie White lay in her sparse room, her heart steady with the divine fire of her rebirth, her mind sharp after overhearing Diane and Rachel's scheme to seduce Liam with incense and miracle oil. The Holy Spirit's mandate, let your truth shine, urged her to act, and Sophie knew the bottle of miracle oil, now in Diane's possession, was her weapon. Her first glue sabotage had humiliated Rachel and Liam, but this time, she'd ensure their disgrace was public, a spectacle to unravel their lies before the village's eyes. At dusk, with Liam in the fields and Diane fussing over Rachel, Sophie slipped into Diane's room, her steps silent on the worn floorboards. The incense sticks lay on a table, their musky scent heavy, but her target was the familiar glass bottle, miracle oil, tucked in a drawer. She worked quickly, pouring the amber liquid into a hidden vial and refilling the bottle with the thick glue she'd kept from her shed. The label remained pristine, betraying nothing. Sophie returned the bottle, her pulse racing with grim anticipation. Rachel's gambit would backfire, and Sophie would fan the flames of their ruin. That night, the house settled into an uneasy quiet. Sophie stayed in her room, feigning sleep, her senses alert. At midnight, Diane's voice murmured outside, coaxing Liam. "Sleep in my room tonight, Liam. I'll stay with Rachel. She's feeling poorly." Liam hesitated, his tone wary. "I'd rather stay with Sophie and Mom." Rachel's sleepwalking worried me last time. Diane's reply was sharp. "Nonsense. I'll watch her. Don't spoil that stubborn girl. Go!" Liam relented, his footsteps fading. Sophie smiled in the dark. Diane's distraction was in motion, and Rachel's trap was set. An hour later, Sophie heard the soft crackle of incense, its heady scent drifting through the house. Then, a piercing scream shattered the silence, raw and anguished, followed by Liam's frantic shouts. Sophie bolted upright, her heart pounding with triumph. She slipped into the hallway, where Diane, startled from her room, rushed toward the noise, her face pale. Sophie followed, her expression one of concern as the screams grew louder, coming from Diane's room. Roused by the commotion, neighbors gathered outside, their lanterns flickering in the night. In the room, Liam and Rachel were a grotesque tableau, their bodies locked together by the glue, their faces contorted in pain and shame. The spilled bottle of miracle oil lay beside them. The incense sticks were smoldering, and their plan was a catastrophic failure. Rachel sobbed, her delicate mask shattered, while Liam roared, "Get help!" Diane hovered, wringing her hands, her voice shrill. "What have you done, Rachel?" "Oh, my poor boy." She tried to cover them with a sheet, but the glue's grip was merciless. each movement drawing fresh screams that echoed beyond the walls. Sophie stood in the doorway, her face a mask of shock for the neighbors' benefit, but her eyes gleamed with the divine spirit's approval. She raised her voice, loud and trembling. "Help! Someone's hurt! There's blood!" The lie was deliberate, a spark to ignite the crowd. Diane spun, her eyes wild. "Sophie White, shut your mouth! Go back to bed!" But Sophie shouted again. "Please, hurry! It isn't perfect!" Diane lunged, trying to silence her, but Sophie shoved her hard, sending Diane sprawling to the floor with a cry. "My leg!" Diane wailed. But Sophie ignored her, calling out, "My mother-in-law's hurt too! Someone help!" The neighbors, now a throng, pushed into the house, their gasps filling the air as they saw Liam and Rachel exposed and helpless. "Shameless!" one woman hissed. "Caught like rats!" another spat. Sophie seized the moment, her voice breaking with rehearsed anguish. "Given everything, I've worked like a mule for them, and this is how they repay me, sneaking around, plotting behind my back." Her words struck like arrows, the crowd's murmurs swelling. "Poor Sophie," a man said. "They used her while carrying on like this." The village's judgment, already simmering from the first glue incident, erupted into a full blaze. Diane scrambled to her feet, her leg miraculously fine, and tried to block the neighbors. But Sophie stepped on her hand, grinding down just enough to draw a scream. "Hurry!" Sophie cried. "Rachel's hurt inside!" The neighbors surged forward, their lanterns illuminating the sordid scene. Liam and Rachel, unable to silence their pain, moaned involuntarily, their dignity stripped bare. The crowd's curses rained down. Disgusting. No decency. As they carried the pair, wrapped in sheets, to the hospital, a humiliating procession through the village. Sophie trailed behind, her sobs loud and calculated, recounting her mistreatment. "They took everything, gifts, money, my life, and gave it to Rachel. They wanted her on the base, not me." Her words spread, village to village, each retelling, cementing Liam and Rachel's infamy. Doctors worked to dissolve the glue at the hospital, their bafflement adding to the spectacle. Sophie slipped away, her heart steady with the divine spirit's pulse. The trap had sprung, exposing the Xander's rot to the world. The village's eyes were now her allies, and Sophie knew her next move would seal their downfall, her truth shining brighter with each step toward freedom. The Xander household lay in disarray, its facade of respectability shattered by the public spectacle of Liam and Rachel's glue-bound disgrace. Sophie White stood in the courtyard, the dawn light casting long shadows as the village's whispers swirled around her, tales of scandal, betrayal, and her mistreatment. The divine fire of her rebirth burned fiercely, the spirit's mandate, "Let your truth shine," urging her to deliver the final blow. Her sabotage had exposed the Xanders' hypocrisy, but to ensure their downfall, Sophie needed to strike at Liam's core, his military honor. With the hospital chaos still fresh, she saw her chance to seal their fate and claim her freedom. While Liam and Rachel endured their humiliating treatment, Sophie moved with purpose. She slipped into the house, her footsteps silent on the worn floorboards, and ransacked every corner for valuables earned through her labor. She gathered cash hidden in Diane's drawer, jewelry Liam had gifted Rachel, and receipts for the chickens, pigs, and geese she'd raised. These weren't thefts, they were hers, the fruits of her toil, hoarded by the Xanders. She packed them into a small sack, her heart steady. Diane, still reeling from the night's events, was at the hospital, and the house's emptiness felt like a victory. Sophie's last act was to sell the livestock at the market. Pocketing the coins, the Xanders would return to a hollow shell, a mirror of the life they'd forced on her. With the sack slung over her shoulder, Sophie made her way to the village's sole telephone, a rickety booth near the market. She dialed the military base, her voice calm but resolute as she requested the disciplinary office. "I'm Sophie White, reporting Liam Xander for immoral conduct," she began, her words precise. "He's been unfaithful, living with his brother's widow, Rachel Shen, while claiming me as his wife. They've deceived the military, violated regulations, and disgraced the uniform." She detailed the glue incidents, the public exposure, Liam's unregistered marriage, and her unassailable account. The officer's tone grew grave, promising an investigation. Sophie hung up, the weight of her actions settling like a cornerstone in her path to justice. She returned to the house one last time, leaving a note on the kitchen table. "I'm gone. Don't look for me." The words were final, severing the chains that had bound her. With the village still buzzing, neighbors recounting the Xander's shame over morning tea, Sophie slipped away, her sack of belongings light, but her spirit heavy with triumph. She boarded a rickety bus to the city, the countryside fading behind her, each mile a step toward a new life. The divine spirit's presence pulsed within her, a silent affirmation that her truth had begun to shine, illuminating Xander's rot for all to see. At the hospital, Liam and Rachel emerged from surgery, and the glue dissolved, but their reputations were in tatters. Doctors whispered, and nurses averted their eyes. The village's gossip had already reached the staff. Rachel, her face pale, avoided Liam's gaze. Her dreams of the base shattered. Liam, his soldier's pride broken, sensed the storm coming. Diane, hovering nearby, ranted about Sophie's absence, unaware of the deeper blow. "That wretch ran off," she spat. But Liam's silence spoke louder, fear of what Sophie might do next. The military's response was swift. Investigators arrived in the village days later, their uniforms stark against the rural backdrop. They interviewed neighbors who eagerly spilled details: Liam's favoritism toward Rachel, Sophie's years of toil, and the glue scandals. "He treated Sophie like a servant," one woman said. "Rachel acted like his wife," another added. The evidence was damning, compounded by Sophie's report and the lack of a marriage certificate with her. Liam was summoned, his face ashen as he faced the inquiry. The verdict came quickly: dishonorable discharge for conduct unbecoming, his rank and pension stripped. Rachel, implicated as his accomplice, faced no formal charges. Evidence of her role was circumstantial. But the social ostracism was punishment enough. Her name became synonymous with scandal, and her widow's status was mocked. Liam returned to the countryside, and the empty house was a stark reminder of Sophie's departure. Diane wailed over the lost livestock and valuables, her greed exposed. But Liam's silence was heavier. The village shunned them, neighbors spitting as they passed, their whispers a constant lash. Shameless soldier, ruined by his lust. Rachel, clinging to Liam out of necessity, faced cold stares, her delicate charm no shield against contempt. Now, miles away, Sophie felt the ripples of their ruin, her heart steady with the divine spirit's guidance. She had exposed their truth, not just to the village, but to the institution Liam valued most. Xander's world was crumbling, and Sophie was free. Her next steps were unwritten, but she had to choose. The justice she'd sown was blooming, and she knew her final reckoning with them would come, her truth shining ever brighter. The city's hum enveloped Sophie White as she stepped off the rickety bus, her sack of pilfered valuables slung over her shoulder. The countryside, with its oppressive Xander household, was a fading memory, replaced by the clamor of street vendors and the glow of lantern-lit shops. Her heart, steadied by the divine fire of her rebirth, pulsed with purpose. The Holy Spirit's mandate, "Let your truth shine," had guided her through sabotage and escape, and now it urged her forward to forge a new life. The coins from Xander's livestock and jewelry were her seed money, earned through years of toil, and she would plant them wisely to rise from the ashes of her past. Sophie found a small room in a bustling district, its walls peeling, but hers alone. She enrolled in night classes, learning to read ledgers and manage accounts, skills the Xanders had never valued. Days she worked in a market stall, her calloused hands deftly sorting produce, her smile drawing customers. Her reborn clarity sharpened her mind, and within a year, she'd saved enough to start a modest textile stall, selling vibrant fabrics she'd once only dreamed of wearing. The city embraced her grit. And Sophie thrived, her days filled with purpose, her nights with study. The scars of her past, threadbare clothes, empty stomachs, faded as she wove a new identity, one stitch at a time. 2 years later, at a merchant's fair, Sophie met Daniel, a kind-eyed trader with a knack for sourcing rare silks. His gentle humor and respect for her ambition sparked a warmth she'd never known. They courted slowly, sharing dreams over tea in crowded cafes. Daniel saw her not as a servant, but as a partner. And when he proposed, Sophie said yes, her heart full. They married quietly, surrounded by new friends who knew nothing of her past. Their first child, a daughter named Lila, arrived a year later, followed by a son, Eli. Once a cycle of sacrifice, Sophie's life bloomed into one of love and stability, her textile business growing into a small shop, its shelves bursting with color. Meanwhile, the Xander household crumbled under the weight of its disgrace. Liam, stripped of his military rank, returned to the village a broken man, his pride shattered by his dishonorable discharge. The empty house, stripped of livestock and valuables by Sophie, mocked his fall. Diane, once imperious, was now frail, her health deteriorating without Sophie's care. She lived alone, abandoned by Rachel, who had clung to Liam out of necessity, not love. The village's scorn was relentless, neighbors whispering, "Liam's no soldier now, and Rachel's no widow, just a disgrace." Their words were a constant lash, isolating the Xanders in their home. Rachel, forced into a marriage with Liam to salvage her reputation, faced a life of misery. Liam, drowning in alcohol, blamed her for his ruin, his once gentle hands now heavy with rage. Their bond, once a facade of loyalty, soured into mutual resentment. Diane, too weak to mediate, watched their fights escalate, her dreams of a harmonious family shattered. Rachel is accustomed to leisure and refuses to work in the fields, leaving Liam to toil alone, his body unaccustomed to the labor Sophie has borne. Diane's meager savings dwindled, and the house fell into disrepair, its walls echoing with shouts and curses. The village turned its back, their former allies now spitting at the mention of the Xanders' name. In the city, Sophie heard snippets of their downfall through traveling merchants, each tale a confirmation of her justice. Her textile shop flourished, her children's laughter filling her home, starkly contrasting the Xanders' decay. Daniel's support grounded her, his pride in her resilience a balm to old wounds. One evening, as she tucked Lila into bed, Sophie reflected on her journey. The divine spirit had granted her rebirth for revenge and to reclaim her worth. Her success was her triumph, built from the ashes of her past life's pain. She had no desire to see the Xanders suffer further. Her victory was in living well, free from their chains. Yet the past lingered. Sophie knew the village held memories of her struggle, and one day she would return, not to gloat, but to face the ghosts of her former self. The divine spirit's ever-steady presence whispered of a final reckoning, a moment to confront Rachel and Liam and close the chapter forever. In the city, surrounded by her family, Sophie felt ready. Her rise was complete, her truth shining in every vibrant bolt of fabric, every smile from her children. The Xanders' ruin was their own making, but Sophie's life was hers, forged with courage and divine grace, a testament to her unbreakable spirit. 10 years had passed since Sophie White fled the Xander household, her heart alight with the divine fire of her rebirth. Now she returned to the village, no longer the weary servant but a radiant woman, her floral dress swaying, her curled hair catching the sunlight. Beside her stood Daniel, her husband, his steady hand holding hers, and their children, Lila and Eli, their laughter echoing through the dusty streets. Sophie's textile business thrived in the city, her life a tapestry of love and success woven from the ashes of her past. The divine spirit's mandate, "Let your truth shine," had guided her to this moment, a return not for revenge, but for closure, to face the ghosts of her former life. The village buzzed as Sophie's sleek car rolled in, neighbors crowding around, their eyes wide with awe. "Sophie White, look at her now," a woman exclaimed. "From rags to riches," another marveled. Amid the throng, Sophie spotted Rachel Shen lingering at the edge, her once delicate features gaunt, her clothes patched and faded, a mirror of Sophie's past self. Rachel's life had crumbled in the decades since Liam's dishonorable discharge. Forced into a marriage with him to salvage her name, she endured his drunken rages, her body scarred from his beatings, her spirit broken by the village's scorn. Diane, frail and abandoned, had died alone years ago, her greed and malice buried with her. Sophie stepped through the crowd, her smile warm but sharp, and stopped Rachel before she could flee. She said, "Long time no see, Rachel," her voice clear, carrying over the murmurs. Rachel's eyes, hollow with shame, darted away. But Sophie's presence held her fast. The crowd hushed, sensing a reckoning. "I have 2 things to say," Sophie continued, her tone steady. "First, I switched the miracle oil with glue that night both times. Second, I reported Liam to the military for his disgraceful conduct. His discharge, your ruin, it was my doing." Gasps rippled through the villagers, old gossip reigniting. Rachel's face twisted, hatred flaring in her eyes. You destroyed us," she hissed, her voice trembling. Sophie's smile didn't waver. "You destroyed yourselves," she said. "You and Liam plotted against me, stole my life, and even killed me at another time. I gave you the gift you deserved. Each other, bound forever in your misery." The crowd whispered tales of the glue scandal, and Liam's fall resurfacing, their contempt for Rachel palpable. Rachel stumbled back, panic overtaking her hatred. She turned and ran toward the dilapidated Xander house, her footsteps frantic, desperate to escape Sophie's radiant triumph and the village's judging eyes. Inside, Rachel found Liam slumped in a chair, reeking of cheap liquor, his face haggard from years of labor and shame. "Liam, it was Sophie," she cried, her voice shrill. "She swapped the oil and got you discharged. She's back, gloating, living like a queen while we rot. We can't let her win. Let's kill her." Rachel's words were venomous, her desperation blinding her to Liam's darkening expression. She believed inciting him would free her from his abuse and let her escape to find another man, another life. But Liam's eyes clouded, a dangerous glint surfacing. He rose, his movement slow, and reached for an axe leaning against the wall. Rachel's slight smile of triumph faltered as Liam turned, his face a mask of ash and rage. "You," he snarled, his voice low and lethal. "You killed my brother with your greed, manipulated my mother, and ruined my life. And now you want to use me to hurt Sophie again?" Rachel froze, horror dawning as Liam raised the axe. "You think I'm your fool?" he roared. The blade swung, a sickening crack echoing as it severed Rachel's leg, blood spraying across the dirt floor. She collapsed, screaming, her face twisted in agony as her severed limb landed feet away. "You don't deserve to live," Liam spat, raising the axe again. "Rot in hell." The village erupted at Rachel's screams and neighbors rushing to the house. Standing with Daniel and their children, Sophie watched calmly as the crowd parted. The police and an ambulance arrived swiftly, summoned by a neighbor's call. Rachel, pale and writhing, was hoisted onto a stretcher, her remaining leg trembling as medics worked to stop the bleeding. Liam, soaked in blood, stood motionless, the axe at his feet, until officers handcuffed him, their faces grim. As they led him to the police car, Liam's eyes met Sophie's through the crowd. The village held its breath, expecting violence, but Sophie stood serene, her divine clarity unshaken. The confrontation had ended, not with her hand but Liam's, his rage turning on the true architect of his ruin. Guided by the divine spirit, Sophie's heart felt no joy in Rachel's suffering, only a quiet resolve. Her return had forced the Xanders' truth into the open, their lies collapsing under their weight. As the police car rolled away, Sophie knew the final chapter awaited, a moment to close the wounds of her past life, to shine her truth one last time before leaving the village forever. The village stood frozen, the air thick with shock as Liam Xander, blood-soaked and handcuffed, was led toward the police car. Rachel Shen, her leg severed, had been rushed to the hospital, her screams still echoing in the crowd's ears. Sophie White stood among the villagers, her floral dress a stark contrast to the grim scene, her husband Daniel and their children, Lila and Eli, close by her side. The divine fire of her rebirth, granted by the Spirit's mercy, burned steadily within her, its mandate. Let your truth shine, fulfilled through her triumphant return and the Xanders' public ruin. Yet, as Liam's eyes met hers, Sophie felt not triumph, but a quiet call to close the wounds of her past life. Liam's gaze, ravaged with sorrow, held a plea unspoken. The crowd tensed, expecting another outburst. But Sophie remained serene, her reborn clarity guiding her. Suddenly, Liam shoved the officer aside and lunged toward her, dropping to his knees with a heavy thud. The villagers gasped, Daniel stepping protectively forward. But Sophie raised a hand, her calm unshaken. Liam's voice, hoarse with regret, broke the silence. Sophie, I'm sorry for everything. Your pain, my lies, Rachel's schemes. I failed you. His words, raw and uncalculated, stirred memories of her past life's betrayal, his false promises, Rachel's fatal blow, and the years of toil she'd endured as a shadow in his world. Sophie looked down at him, her heart tracing the arc of her journey. She had been reborn not just to punish, but to reclaim her worth, to rise above the Xander's deceit. Her sabotage, her report to the military, and her escape to the city had dismantled their lies, her truth shining through the village's scorn and Liam's discharge. Her life now, filled with Daniel's love and her children's laughter, was proof of her victory. Yet the divine spirit's gift carried a deeper purpose: to heal, not just to avenge. Holding on to hatred would tether her to the past, a chain she refused to wear again. I forgive you, Sophie said, her voice explicit, each word deliberate. The crowd murmured, stunned by her grace. Liam's eyes widened, tears spilling as he bowed his head, the weight of her words breaking him further. Sophie's forgiveness was not for him, but for her, a release of the rage that had once consumed her. In her past life, she died humiliated, her screams unheard. Now she stood radiant, her truth acknowledged by all, her heart free. The divine spirit pulsed within her, a silent nod to her choice. She had not just survived, she had transcended. As officers pulled Liam to his feet, he offered no resistance, his face a mask of resignation. The police car rolled away, carrying him to face charges for Rachel's maiming. Sophie learned later that Rachel survived, confined to a wheelchair, her trial uncovering her role in Sophie's past life murder. The military investigation, spurred by Sophie's report, had dug deeper, finding witnesses who confirmed Rachel's malice. She was sentenced to years in prison, and her dreams of a pampered life were extinguished. The village, once her stage, now shunned her, her name a byword for disgrace. Sophie turned to Daniel, his steady hand grounding her, and hugged Lila and Eli, their warmth a reminder of her new life. The villagers, their awe tinged with respect, recounted her story, how she'd outwitted the Xanders, risen from servitude to success, and faced her betrayers gracefully. Sophie's a phoenix, one woman whispered, burned but reborn stronger. Sophie smiled the divine spirit's guidance, a quiet hum in her soul. She had returned not to gloat, but to close a chapter, to let her truth shine one final time. As the family climbed into their car, the village fading behind them, Sophie reflected on her journey. The divine spirit had granted her rebirth to right a cosmic wrong, but its deeper gift was freedom. Freedom to love, thrive, and forgive as she. Her textile shop is awaited in the city, its shelves vibrant with possibilities, just like her life. Rachel and Liam, bound by their own choices, would carry their scars, but Sophie was unbound in her heart. She glanced at her children, their faces bright, and squeezed Daniel's hand. The past was buried, the future hers to weave. With a final glance at the village, Sophie drove away, her truth a beacon that would shine forever.